Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Master Plan for Aging Research Subcommittee meeting. Before we jump in, there are a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to cover, and then I'll pass it over to Director Wade for a brief introduction. Today's meeting is all virtual. You can join us using your smartphone, tablet, computer, or dial in using the telephone information on your screen. Live captioning is available. Subtitles can be enabled by clicking on the closed captioning icon on your toolbar, and the upwards arrow next to the icon will allow you to toggle subtitle settings so you can increase the size of the subtitles. And lastly, materials, including the slides from today's meeting, will be reviewed for accessibility and posted online to the California Health and Human Services Master Plan for Aging webpage. There will be an opportunity for public comment at the end of the meeting. For those of you who are joining by webinar, you can select the raise hand icon on your toolbar to join the queue. And if you're participating by phone only, you can press *9. We also welcome public comment and feedback via email to engage@aging.ca.gov. That's engage@aging.ca.gov. We ask that all research subcommittee members, guest speakers, and members of the public follow the 5 meeting guidelines outlined on this slide. 1, start and end on time. 2, one person speaks at a time. 3, we ask that you're fully present. 4, we ask that you use respectful language and tone. And lastly, 5, assume good intentions. And with that, I'll pass it over to Director Wade.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you to what I'm astounded to say is the last research subcommittee of the Master Plan for Aging, and in fact, the last subcommittee meeting of any group of the Master Plan for Aging. So this is momentous. I will have more to say about our agenda today and our timeline, given the robust process, but also the changes to it due to COVID. But first, want to introduce and ask Maria to introduce the incredible expertise and partnership and leadership we have from Research Subcommittee. Maria, please.
Thank you. Well, we'll do a quick roll call for Research Subcommittee members. So I'm going to read your name. Please say here or present if you're here. And if you're a subcommittee member and you don't have the option to unmute, you may have joined the meeting as a member of the public. In that case, you can use your raise hand icon, or if you're dialing in, press *9 and we'll open your line. So we'll start with our Goal 1 members, Gretchen Alkema. Gretchen, I know you're here. Donna Benton.
Here. Here.
Thank you, Donna. Hi. Kathleen Kelly. Okay. Catherine Keitzman.
Here.
Our Goal 2 members, Laura Carstensen.
Present.
Thank you. Stacy Moore.
Present.
Jeannie Parker Martin.
Here.
David Ragland.
Here.
Next slide, please. All right, Goal 3, Zia Aga.
I'm here.
Janet C. Frank. Shireen McSpadden. Dr. Karen Lincoln.
Here.
Nari Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Ramon Casablanc.
Present.
Okay, and I think that's it. Can we go to the next slide?
One more slide.
There's one more. Okay, David Lindeman.
Here.
Thank you. Sharon Nevins.
Here.
Marty Amoto. Jennifer Breen. Derek Dolphy. Christopher Langston.
Here.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'll pass it back to you, Kim.
Thank you so much. And it is wonderful to see you all, even virtually, as we work in these new ways and all the wonderful backdrops we have. And Even in our pre-meet, many of us acknowledge that we have family and pets and life happening. So all are welcome here as we gather at the table and continue this work forward in these unprecedented times. If we can look at the timeline and really try to focus where we are, gosh, over a year ago, last June, the governor issued the executive order that very clearly called for a research subcommittee, one of the two standing subcommittees, and directed us to do a person-centered, data-driven master plan for aging over the next 10 years to guide our state into the new future that we are already beginning to enter of more aging and more diversity of aging and greater understanding of that diversity and promise of aging. We were moving into a very robust process of consultation between the various policy and program areas and the research subcommittee when in March, COVID really changed everything for all of us in so many ways. And while the master plan process paused in March and resumed in May, we really do need to acknowledge that the research subcommittee process probably got the most impact of that. The month-by-month plan we had of a very thoughtful, structured consultation one at a time with each issue area has gotten very compressed. So a couple things I want to say about that as we set the table for your work today. First of all, thank you. Thank you for understanding that we are in a new land and trying to make this work and continue to meet our governor's expectation of a master plan, no longer in October, but by December. Got a 2-month extension. Thank you for all the work that happened this summer. I mentioned this, there hasn't been a meeting in a month, but every single one of your emails is recognizable to me because you were all so frequently in touch. David Linderman, I can hear you. If you can be muted, thanks. And David Ragland, sorry. I know your voices too as well. So thank you for that as we have strived to adapt and make this work. I also want to say, just to hope to take everyone's pressure down and shoulders down on this, is that really what we're doing now is we're finalizing the stakeholder recommendations for our September 15th meeting, the final stakeholder advisory meeting. You see that box there, September 15th, 2020, present the research agenda and data dashboard to SAC. And the administration in October, November will be working to finalize it and release it in December as the administration's master plan. But I think everyone on this group knows, and if not, I'm going to say it again. We will not have all the answers by September 15th. We won't even have all the answers by December. We are charged with setting a foundation for this work, for the next 10 years. And even the executive order called on an annual update process to make sure that this is responsive. And now more than ever, I think it's very challenging to imagine a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So please don't feel like everything has to be completely perfect. The idea would be that it be the solid foundation, the best of our thinking now, and that it have that ability to adapt and be nimble as we learn more and work more together. So please give yourself that freedom to land this work, to do so strategically and effectively, but also know it will continue to evolve. And to that end, one thing that what's not on this chart, of course, is the next slide. What happens after December 20? And that's really the beginning of the work, the implementation. And so as we begin to transition to thinking about 2021 and beyond the implementation, there will of course be a need for continued research engagement and involvement. So while we are ending the planning process with stakeholders in the next few weeks, we will in short order beginning the implementation process with stakeholders. So there is surely more to come on that front. So all that's to say, thank you for what you've done. This is a very important stage and we will take the work as far as we can, but know that there are future opportunities to continue to inform it that will be clearer and spelled out more in coming weeks. And also, most of all, just to be gentle and kind with each other as we're all multitasking and dealing with, everybody's got more on their plate than we all can imagine. So we're all doing the best we can and it's gonna be great. So with that, we're going to do 4 things in 3 hours as we do. Can I go back to the agenda just for a second to do a high level agenda? One slide back, please. 4 things today, and I will get out of the way to let you all lead the work you've been leading. The Equity Work Group is going to share their Master Plan for Aging evaluation and assessment recommendations. The second thing we're going to do is talk about that broader research agenda overview and discussion to make sure that we are evaluating and assessing and learning and using that to drive aging policy programs and partnerships for the next 10 years. The third thing we're going to do is hear about the data dashboard, and it's so much of an update that we'll take a break in the middle to give our captioners and ourselves a chance to stretch our legs and refresh before we come back. And then public comment, really important we hear from the public, and so we want to have some, enough time. I see 38 attendees are on the line, so we'd like to make sure we have time to hear spoken comments and emails as always. So those are our 4 goals for the day, and we will get through them on time as we do. With that, unless Maria or anyone else, our consultants, Terry Shire, Carrie Graham, have anything to add to that table setting, we will get started. Hearing none, I will turn it over to Dr. Lincoln.
Very good. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Equity Work Group, I am here to present one set of our multi-set recommendations. So this set of recommendations is focused on evaluation and assessment. So we recognize that measurement is an important yet underused tool for reducing disparities in aging and disability services. Measurement is very important because it can allow policymakers, providers, consumers, and other stakeholders an opportunity to identify disparities in their communities, to target resources and interventions that can reduce those disparities, as well as monitoring the improvement and even the worsening of disparities in response to these interventions or other changes. However, in order to be an effective tool for advancing health equity, performance measurement must be implemented in a way that specifically accounts for disparities in risk factors, experiences, access, quality of life, and wellness outcomes. So we're recommending several ways to structure performance measurement to reduce equity. To that end, we provided a set of guidelines or frameworks to select or design measures to evaluate the impact of the master plan. So our first recommendation is to develop an inclusive assessment and evaluation plan to identify gaps in data, priority problems, select appropriate outcome indicators, set targets, and measure results. So what we've done is we've offered a report by Family USA, their health equity task force. And the title of this report is a framework for advancing health equity and value. It offers very important and helpful strategies and measures for transforming systems to achieve equity. Our second recommendation is in recognition that there is a paucity of data on the experience of diverse older adults and their families. It is advised to identify available tools and frameworks to identify local factors that determine inequity in community conditions. So for this recommendation, we offered a number of data sources and indexes, or indices, if you prefer the Latin plural, to support this recommendation. So we recommended using and consulting the California Healthy Places Index. That will allow those who are evaluating the impact of the master plan to identify highly vulnerable communities as well as intervention targets. We've also recommended the International Classification of Functioning, Disability, and Health. This is a very important tool to organize and document functioning and disability as a function of individual health, environmental factors, and personal factors. We've also recommended data sources like the California Health Intervention Survey, or the CHIS, to utilize the nation's largest state health survey to obtain health data about the state's various racial, ethnic, and other diverse groups. We've also recommended the Elder Economic Standard, the Elder Economic Security Standard, or the Elder Index, which will provide an evidence-based indicator of the actual basic costs faced by older adults. Our third recommendation recognizes that directly measuring inequities and progress toward eliminating them requires using disparities-sensitive measures that detect disparities in populations and equity measures that assess whether programs and services that increase equity are being implemented. So accordingly, we recommend that the development and use of reliable disparities-sensitive and equity measures to assess the master plan goals is a priority. Specifically, we recommend that disparity-sensitive measures be based on the following criteria: a condition's prevalence among populations with social risk factors, the size of the disparity, the strength of the evidence, linking improvement on the measures to improvement in target outcomes for populations with social risk factors, and the actionability of the measure. So we've offered a white paper by the Urban Institute titled "The State of Equity Measurement" as a guiding framework to support this recommendation. This report offers equity definitions and subsequent measurement, both qualitative and quantitative measures, both of which are going to be very important for including communities, particularly the qualitative assessments, as well as the quantitative assessments. And then our final recommendation is to report performance data stratified by race, ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status, age, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and other demographic factors to identify disparities and evaluate the impact of specific service delivery changes on outcomes for members of underserved and under-resourced communities, and whether these delivery changes are reducing or widening disparities. So that is our set of recommendations for assessment and evaluation.
Any
I
discuss-
think we,
Thanks, Carrie.
we might have a time for 1 or 2 questions or thoughts or reactions to Dr. Lincoln's presentation before we get into the research agenda. And if you have, if you want to speak, can you just raise your hand among the panelists? Jeannie Parker Martin.
Thank you so much, Karen, and the team that worked on these. I think these are thorough and comprehensive and excellent guidelines to move forward with. Thank you so much for all your work.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeannie.
The next is Christopher Langston.
So I also thank the group, but trying to keep a sort of big structural level vantage point here that's going to make this work over time. I think the resources needed to do this is an important observation. If you want to look at very detailed and even crossing intersectional issues in terms of race, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, it's going to require significant oversampling to get reliable data for what are, in the population, relatively speaking, small groups. So, there are budgetary aspects that have to be faced here if we're going to use, say, the California Health Interview Survey for these purposes.
Yes, I agree. And just a response, thank you. The CHIS is yet one data source that we can use. Obviously, there are much larger national data sets that we might be able to stratify by state, but just in offering an example of something that is focused on health, that has a large sample of older adults, that's fairly diverse, it's definitely one data source that we would recommend.
Okay, and I'll just pipe in here that we're lucky to have Catherine Keatsman on our research subcommittee, who is very involved in the CHIS data set. So we will have her comment on that in a minute. So next we're going to go into what do we call our research agenda. We've never come up with a better name for it, but we have Laura Carstensen from Stanford Center on Longevity and David Lindeman from UC Berkeley. And they're going to go through some slides of a potential research agenda that we could put forward to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. So Laura, can I hand it over to you?
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, and let me just thank Carrie here publicly, because none of this would be happening today without her masterful pulling together different pieces of this agenda and different people for their input. And David, I'm gonna start talking here, but please chime in at any point, and I will of course refer all questions to you.
Thank you.
There you go. I knew I could get him to unmute for that part. You know, it was exciting for me just now to listen to Dr. Lincoln describe the approach and the reason for this approach, because I think you just really eloquently laid out why a research agenda is such an important part of the master plan. As Kim had noted at the beginning, we were mandated to do this. And as we started to think about research, at least in the meetings I was in, we were sort of thinking about it as, you know, we'll look at outcomes, you know, something will happen a couple years later, we'll go back and look at whether it worked or not. And as discussion continued to proceed, it was really clear that this was much more embedded into the entire master plan. That is, as we think about a master plan as being evidence-based, one part of that is that we say, well, we want to make recommendations that have some evidence supporting them. So we aren't simply pulling things out of the sky and saying this would be a good idea, but rather drawing on existing research to support the recommendations. But then the part that becomes so exciting about this to me is that we're going to learn along the way. So the implementation of the plan is the way that the research piece of that will guide it. So we'll be able to see what's working along the way. We can make corrections in real time when we see evidence that something isn't working, and ultimately be able to use the research agenda to ensure that quality of life is improving for aging Californians and that we are reducing inequities. And so to be able to do that, to pull it all together in that way, really will rest on measurement as we proceed. So in my mind, this is a really exciting opportunity and something that is really unprecedented. I have mentioned before to people along the way that I think there's a part of this process that got bolstered by our COVID experience. We ended up interacting more in many ways, I think, because we could zoom into meetings and interact with each other. And as the interactions proceeded, we got to know each other, and the participants in this major effort come from such a diverse set of backgrounds and disciplines, from people who are working every day with older adults to people who are developing policies to people like me who are spending time in universities and laboratories. And so being able to have this kind of an exchange and to be able to get to know each other through the process, I think is really going to make this research agenda much, much stronger. So when we think about the overall mission, it is to improve the lives of older Californians, and to do so by an alliance of researchers that is guided by a group of policymakers and practitioners, advocates, older adults, together to say, what are we going to look at? What are we going to measure? And to be able to do that together over time. I think the fact that this will be driven by a group of people approaching aging from such different perspectives will be just a very, very powerful strength of the research agenda. So what are we trying to accomplish specifically? What will we do and create in order to achieve this overall mission? One of the things that we want to do is to create a consortium. And by the consortium, I'm referring to this diverse set of people who are going to meet together, work together, continue to interact, who will identify what the questions are and also set benchmarks for achievable goals over time. The second part is to create an alliance of researchers across California's universities and research bodies who can oversee the integration of existing data on aging Californians and also identify gaps where we need more data We just heard about the importance of doing this. We really are going to need additional data collection to answer the questions in as comprehensively a way as we hope. So we'll have by the consortium, in definition, we're recruiting to the broader body of people who are going to guide the research agenda. And the Alliance of Researchers will be people placed in research settings who can actually oversee the integration, the analysis of the data, and while they're interacting with the consortium. And then what we're doing with the process will allow us to do is to really carefully look at disparities. And again, there's broad agreement, I think, for all of us who are working on this master plan effort to use the plan to really help those who are in greatest need and to make sure that it's benefiting people in some equitable way. Too often policies end up helping the people who needed help the least and making them better off and failing to reach people who need it most. And so by having this master plan run in parallel to the implementation of this, we will be able to see what's happening along the way. There'll be very close connection between the research alliance and those working on the data dashboard, which you'll hear more about. With the data dashboard, in my mind, I'm seeing this is something that's going to be incredibly, just incredibly useful, making data up to date kind of for policymakers and citizens to be able to come and look at a particular region, a particular group, and to look at the status across a number of variables. So there'll also be lots of close ties between the Research Alliance and those who are working on the data dashboard. One part of the proposal is to produce a state of the state report each year. It's possible each year is annual, would be too much, and we should make it every other or every 3 years. But we should have an issue a report on where things stand along through the implementation. One of the things I want to say is that by measuring the effects over time, we'll also be able to carefully assess and follow outcomes that are not immediately obvious. That is, sometimes you increase access to health care and, not surprisingly, costs go up. So we need to be able to look at short-term effects and then long-term effects. One would expect in that situation that the short-term effects may actually increase costs, but the long-term effects would be expected to bring it down. So it's being able to follow the effects over time. And another aim of the research agenda is to do some sophisticated modeling of what the future elderly population in the state would look like without a master plan, and then to be able to model under a variety of scenarios what would happen under if-then scenarios, and a number of different things. So you can create a lot of different scenarios and follow them over time. One of the things that these kinds of models helps you do is you can identify, in some cases, a short-term effect. Let's say you increase social access to others. Let's say you reduce isolation. And you could look at a relatively small benefit to that in the very short term. But then what you can do is model the effects of that relatively small term change as it's compounded over time, and begin to ultimately look at what cost savings would be and make those predictions early on in a process. So you don't have to wait 10 years to see the ultimate outcome, but we can measure these things along the way with simulations. So we will be able, again, we just keep kind of going back to, apologies. There we go. Sorry, Sarah, I guess I can't both talk to you and turn off my phone, mute my phone, but it'll stop ringing in just a second here. I think these are the ways that the data-driven aspects of the implementation of the plan will contribute to the effectiveness. So what will we do? The consortium itself, so that this diverse group of people will vet and advise researchers and policymakers to make sure that the aging research that's going on is aimed at the issues and questions that we are all committed to answering. We want to make sure that the research is translatable into policy so that these are actionable findings that we are generating along the way. Let me say as an aside here that establishing this research agenda and supporting the basic core of it will no doubt lead to many additional studies that'll go on, because we will be putting together a unique data set that is rich with different variables and aspects that all contribute to quality of life. And this is going to attract researchers not just from other California settings, but nationally and probably internationally. People will be interested in studying this. And so by having the core, I think we'll also activate lots more research than the core research that we're describing here today. So I think we'll get lots and lots of other questions answered along the way. This core effort will be aimed at improving quality of life in an equitable manner. The consortium is also going to be working with the Research Alliance to identify where the gaps are, recommend new data analysis if there are new programs, new policies put in place, new federal changes that could affect things. We'll constantly be working together to identify those and measure outcomes. And then we'll also be looking for ways that we can raise additional funds so we can support additional aspects of this, including things like training. We believe that with this Research Alliance, we'll be able to train a group of researchers that, again, sort of uniquely is aware of policy implications and trained in state-of-the-art statistical analytical approaches. So the components, I've alluded to these before, but just to revisit, we'll have this advisory body of experts. That's the consortium. That includes everybody who's involved in this research agenda. Second, we have this university-based research alliance, and there are lots of ways we can do this. David Lindeman and I have had some talks about it. You can imagine having a special effort at Berkeley, for example, looking at technology and technology effects on various outcomes. There are people at USC who are expert in the statistical modeling of the future elderly scenarios. So they may be looking at part of that. Of course, you know, see a group that there could be a group of researchers there. And the idea is that we would stay in touch across these universities, bring people together so that we know what we're working on in from these different foci. The other piece of this that we need to ensure is that we can place postdoctoral fellows, is probably the least expensive way to do this, in these different settings, and so that while they're being trained, they're actually also, as we all know, really doing the work and the data integration, data cleaning. We need to have some kind of a set of research workers who are actually combing through the data and working together. The best way for university-based faculty to work together is through postdocs. And so if David has a postdoc and I've got a postdoc and they're working together, it brings us together too. And we have more interactions. And so it's a really good way to get this done. As I say, it's also quite cost-effective way to do it. And then you're going to hear much more about the Data Action Center, the Data Warehouse, and you'll hear more about the dashboard and so on later this afternoon from people who know far more than I do. But that's the overall kind of plan. I see the difference between the data dashboard and the Research Alliance is that the data dashboard is making great efforts to be public facing, and the Research Alliance will be looking at sort of structural lag models and simulations of various scenarios and outcomes that are possible, monitoring changes along the way. I think now I could leave this slide in front of you. I feel like I'm just repeating things that I've said here on the outcomes. But I will underscore that the plan that we're proposing, I believe, will ultimately save the state money by helping to direct the funding in its most efficient and effective way so that we can guide policies and make sure we're addressing the needs of underserved Californians most effectively. So I see that as the overall overarching outcome. Another, of course, is that we're going to create and train a new generation of people who are very familiar with Californians and their needs, and will be able to continue to lead into the future. David, can I turn to you for anything there that I'm leaving out?
Absolutely, Laura. And I don't think there is much. I can just add a few more contextual issues that will lead us to opening it up to our colleagues and the audience for questions, if we can take those at this time. But first, let me reinforce again, thank you to Carrie, who has helped shepherd this through, but Laura, to your leadership in bringing us all together. I think the one thing that we've seen in this group, and appreciate everybody's input, has been the fact that it really shows what resources we have in California, the fact that we have one of the richest research communities in the world that can look at aging and all the issues around longevity, and that we have the opportunity to do this in an interdisciplinary fashion. This is really a unique opportunity to go forward and to do it in collaboration with the Department on Aging as a partner. So this is being recommended as a method for bringing the very best researchers together to have the greatest contribution for the people of California. And what we didn't emphasize as much in here, but we know that everybody on the research committee and the Master Plan on Aging committee realizes this is first and foremost to benefit older adults, but it's also to address family caregivers and the workforce in this space. And that the benefits, as are stated here, and expected outcomes, and as Laura nicely laid out, it's not just for policymakers, but how do we improve information and knowledge for providers, do knowledge exchange to older adults themselves to help with engagement and empowerment. And the last two items to add before we could open it up to other members of the group, we have over 10 years now an amazing opportunity to take advantage not only of the rich data, because data is going to be the driver for the next decade through both the dashboard that we'll be hearing about shortly, but also data sets and new analytic methods to use those data to help really improve the well-being of older adults. The idea that we'll be able to look at not only best practices in that area, but applying new data science areas, new research methodologies, is really what this whole idea is about, bringing a consortium together to use it in the very best way to benefit, again, older adults. And finally, I think just to head this off before some of our colleagues come on, one of the things Laura leaves this to me to mention is that this will clearly require resources to bring groups together, whether it's for training purposes or data collection, or just to bring the very best researchers together. So we realize it should not be the tail wagging the dog, but we think that the benefits of this, as Laura nicely laid out, to benefit not only the bottom line for the state, but also best outcomes, will require some resources to make this happen. So with that, I'll just turn it back to, I know Laura and I are ready to take questions, and Carrie, you may have other steps. It depends on the amount of time we have.
No, I think we have a good amount of time. We have 20 minutes to discuss this. If you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, make a suggestion, please put your hand up. Christopher, I see your hands up, but it might still be from the last time. So a couple things we want to do. We want to spend some time fleshing this out a little bit, getting more suggestions. I know this has been sent out to everyone, and some of you have already had an opportunity. Ask questions, as well as before we move on to the dashboard, I really like to pin down next steps and how we could get to this to the point that it's ready to present to SAC at their September 15th meeting. So with that, our first hand up, please raise your hand. You're on the Zoom, and the first person up is Nari Reed.
Hi there. So first of all, I want to thank you. I think the whole idea is really wonderful, and especially given the compressed timeline that we've had to do our work. I was just thinking there's no way we can actually address even some of the things that we were tasked with on just given the deadlines that we have. So I want to sort of raise one kind of key point, which has to do with the framing around cost savings. Because we're dealing with a context in which, right, public services are underfunded, care labor is underfunded, and it's subsidized by women and workers of color who do the work or who give up their earnings in order to take care of people. Yeah. And also, just my background is in retirement income and assets, right? We're heading into this retirement wave with a massive household level deficit in retirement income and assets. So I support the idea of getting government dollars to spent more efficiently, right? Better in one place than another. But I do think that there has to be some identification of what is essentially the funding gap, right? What is a level of current and projected underfunding for some of these services? Because I think there's going to be more money involved, right? We can't fix these issues without actually throwing more money at it. So I just want to sort of highlight that as something to be mindful of in terms of especially discussions about cost savings measures.
Well said.
I agree, and yeah, can I just in sympathy or empathy with you, I've talked to Carrie. It's really hard to talk about doing this in the plan outside of money. That is, knowing what we have, what's going to be invested in the master plan, what the research agenda and the evaluation will cost, and then that's just beginning to get it. You know, sort of how can we think about things like family caregiving and the cost savings that comes from that in a way that will be able to translate into something that can inform the state and how best and most economically efficiently care for people. You know, I mean, some of the work that's going on now, as I'm sure you know, is work where researchers are trying to improve quality of care by reducing cost. That is sort of turning on its head, you know, the kinds of relationships that we think of. But it turns out that the social determinants of health are incredibly important. And sometimes having a social worker go visit a family where one member of the family thinks that they need to go to an emergency room is the best way to help that family and that individual health-wise, and not to mention the kind of cost savings. So I think in many ways we may be able to find, and by the way, learn from the diversity of the state in terms of ethnicity. We know we've got representation in California of a lot of different approaches to care. And so we can begin to say what works and what doesn't. So I'm hopeful that we might actually begin to be able to identify best practices in a way where we can also bring down costs by eliminating those practices.
Okay, we have Jeannie Parker Martin. Jeannie, you can unmute yourself. Great.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much to David and Laura. Those were excellent remarks that you made leading up to this. And Nari, I just want to follow up on something you said, because I think you had a really critical message that I heard just slightly differently, so I don't want to miss it. And that is the shift in where the money is, in the sense that if I am working in the workforce now, I might have a $60,000 job, and I may give up that $60,000 job to care for my loved one who needs my care at home, regardless of how infirm they actually are, regardless of their current ability or situation. So that economic impact is what I heard being commented on, as well as what Laura commented on. And so I'm wondering, in the context of the Master Plan for Aging and the research agenda, if there is an opportunity for us to go deeper into this economic impact and the shift in the burden of caregiving. So, and there might already, you probably know, Nari, there probably already have been studies done on this. I know I see information about the number of hours that are given in, quote, volunteer sort of time, but I haven't seen any analysis of that actual shift of the cost burden in terms of the economic, I don't know what we could call it, but threshold, really. So that $60,000 multiplied by 1 million people is a significant impact to the economy when those people are no longer making any money, in addition to the fact that we're trying to save money for the state. So there's, I think from an economic standpoint, there's some sort of a balance maybe that could be assessed. Maybe that's a 5-year goal or a 6 or 8 year goal. Maybe that's in the long-term goal section. But I think that's critical for us to not lose sight of. So thank you for raising that, Nari.
Thank you. Yeah, and that is a point. It's not just about what the state spends, and it actually is about what's happening at the household level and across the economy, because it ripples, right? For people who give up their jobs, it ripples their entire lives in terms of reduced retirement income, reduced Social Security benefits. But I think, again, at a certain point, there's just a need for more money, just given the demographics of aging, and it's really hard to get around that. Thank you.
All right, we're going to go to Donna Benton. If you can unmute yourself, Donna.
Thank you. I didn't expect it to come to me. There looks to be so many other hands up.
Well, the only other hand up I see is Christopher Langston, but I still think that might be a carryover.
Oh, it's real.
Oh, okay, you're next.
Thank you. You know, obviously, a lot of the conversation so far is speaking to my heart around understanding the value of caregiving and the fact that this is going to be something that impacts people throughout their lifetime, and that we need to begin to look at that from a data standpoint, where it goes across longitudinally across generations, because even I know that we have even college students who have cut back their time to care for parents for a few years, or students who are in high school. I mean, it really goes across so many ages. So I think that that's one of those things that we have to continue to look at from a research standpoint. The other thing, just on our expected outcomes is, and you know, this is sometimes just a lang wording, but for our definitions that I'm hoping that we should have some level of definitions, but we have evidence-based service provision. And, you know, evidence-based sometimes is not always, from a research standpoint, evidence-based may not always be culturally sensitive. So I think it is going to be important for us to look at how we use that term evidence-based as opposed to maybe data-informed, evidence-informed type service provision, because if things always have their evidence-based in the strict research sense, I think that we will lose what we just had the beginning of our discussion around equitable ways of handling data. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Donna. We're going to go to Christopher Langston next, and then after that is Stacy Moore and Ramon Castablanc.
Thank you very much. I think the first thing I wanted to observe is that I think this research need is real. We've been doing stuff in the elder services area the same way fundamentally we've been doing it for 20, 30 years. And I think Donna's point about evidence-based versus evidence-informed, I mean, what that's in part telling us is that we don't have, what you might call real RCT level, proof for lots of populations and programs where we'd want it. So that's part of the reason why this is actually a good idea. But as always, devils are in the details. And a couple of things, I've supported researchers over the years in lots of different ways. And one of the key issues is, of course, they are a rambunctious bunch and they do what they want. And that's in fact why they have like academic positions, is so they can say, no, I don't want to do this. They don't work for somebody, they work for themselves. So governance is a key issue. How is this research consortium gonna, agree to do something that nobody really wants to do because it's not much fun and not much interest? And even postdocs can't be, ordered around blithely. So governance, I think, is something that hasn't been addressed sufficiently. And then that intersects with government procurement issues. Resources are clearly going to matter. Researchers don't work for free. Data doesn't come in by itself. Somebody has to pay. That's my job. And yet government has rules about how it asks certain parties to do certain things and a bidding process. And if you want this research consortium to kind of be real and have ongoing work on a regular basis, it's got to be figured out how that's going to interact with regular procurement, or the jobs are going to be taken by somebody else, some other firm, not inside the research consortium, and it's not going to work out very well. The end. Hand down. Bye.
Can I respond to that,
Please
Christopher?
do. Please do.
What'd you say, Carrie?
Yes, please do.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's part of the beauty of what we've been thinking of with this approach, is that there's a consortium that the researchers are part of, along with advocates and service providers and policymakers. The consortium is what's guiding the master plan. As I was listening to you talk, I completely agree with you. This thing could go off the rails really easily in other, and if it was constituted differently. I kind of think, again, when I was listening to you talk about researchers, which I agree, I was thinking maybe instead of grants to universities to fund this, we want contracts. The difference for those of you who may not be working in this area all the time is that with a grant, you're giving it to an individual to do something, and if they change their mind on how it should be done, it's okay. Whereas a grant really says, this is what has to get done. And if you administered the core research agenda through grants, through contracts, that would mean that we would be collecting the data that the consortium decides needs to be collected. And that would be directing just the core. Again, if we can establish a core data set, it would be, if the way that we've been describing here and over the months among ourselves, it would be unique in the world. And so we would create that as the core. Then that's there for other researchers to come in, and if they want to go get a grant from you, Christopher, great, to ask a very different question about something that might be interesting. So you could still have, I guess what I'm saying is the kind of outlaw researchers, going off in their various ways of, asking a question because it's of interest. And that would get done too, because they'd be able to get grants in part because they'd be able to cite this core data set and data core that's being overseen. So I think that would be a great strength of it. And that would also, if I'm understanding you, address the concern that it doesn't just go off in a million different directions.
Great. Stacy Moore.
Thank you, Carrie. My comment will be very brief. I really just wanted to, first of all, commend Laura and David on the proposed framework for the research agenda and the consortium. I think it's excellent, and just want to note how beautifully aligned it is with the equity measures that Karen presented to us prior to this discussion, how beautifully aligned they are. And I'm very excited to hear about the intention to have robust multifactorial analysis happening, and really sophisticated modeling that could be able to project into future the results of specific interventions. And so just wanted to again just congratulate you on the framework and really love it.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Ramon now.
Thank you. I want to comment on the documented cost savings. I think that we need to factor in the investments that are going to be necessary to achieve these cost savings. If we assume, for example, that family caregivers are going to take up the load, we need to take a look at what we need to spend to make sure that that works out. Otherwise, these savings could evaporate. So hopefully the modeling will include both the investment costs alongside of the potential savings.
Absolutely.
Okay, Gina Parker Martin.
Yeah, I just want to comment on Laura's comments regarding the contract. I think that construct seems, I'm not familiar with the way all of those university grants and contracts actually work, but I think that concept of a construct is very helpful to consider as we move forward, along with the economic impacts of the return on investment. How much do we have to spend to go into a cohesive contract over a multi-year period? And I also think the concept that we have discussed previously about an incredibly rich database that's available for myriad researchers, whether or not they're university-based or rogue researchers, independent individuals who want to study a particular element, could really be helpful to the overall system. And we know from other data sets that are available currently in much different ways, much smaller data sets are used widely. So I think that would be masterful. And I don't recall if that is actually included. I don't think that point about contracts is, but I don't know if there's an opportunity in the written elements of this. I don't know if we have a written document other than our slides right now, but we might want to add that somewhere within the context of the master plan for aging so that those thoughts aren't lost.
Yeah, and that brings us really nicely, I think, into our next point, which is to try to pin down next steps. And David has his hand up as well, and maybe you could make your comment and also kind of bring us around to how we need to have something by September 9th that we feel comfortable taking to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. It could be something similar to this, a slide presentation. It could be a written document. It could be more detailed than this. It could be less detailed than this. So I'd like to hand it over to David. And I know you have other comments, but maybe we could also kind of close with what our next steps would be.
Sure, Carrie, and do this with Laura and again, any other members of the group that's been thinking about this. I'll just initiate that by following up exactly. I was going to comment where Jeannie just took us, that part of this, in addition to, as Chris says, a need for a governance model, need for dedicated funding, using Laura's approach with what would be appropriate from a contract, so it's dedicated and targeted. But the other element, as Jeannie was just saying, the data. We've actually had a concept of a data lake, which we have put forward for machine intelligence work, not only multi-university across country with MIT, Berkeley, Stanford's now in it, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, University of Chicago. The idea for the very best researchers to focus in AI and machine learning with large data sets that would be open not only to university and academia, but to the private sector to work on this. And the idea that this builds it's more robust than the data dashboard, but it's a critical issue that if we should write that into this element to go forward, because that would create a unique data set, an aging data lake, if you will, that could be used to advance these topics. As Laura says, this is a unique opportunity and a unique group that could be put together, but it needs these structural issues to move it forward. So to your point, Carrie, I would just suggest that we take the key elements from this, that we frame it, if the group agrees, along the lines that have been so nicely done by each of the other work groups, so that we have the key elements and the specific recommendations, and that we keep these principles in there and the additional ones that were mentioned today. I think just putting it forward in that framework, because we do know that it's going to need champion, and that when it's taken back to the governor, that will have to be considered, and it is a issue of priorities. But we think that, again, if we can show the benefits of this in the long term and how it is a partnership with the state and with the department, it can really have impacts far reaching beyond what we can even envision today. I'll stop there.
Okay, and so to land next steps, it sounds to me like we need to add a section on funding and a section on governance. Laura?
Happy to help with that. Happy to help.
I volunteer you to take a crack at that. I can certainly help.
Sure.
And also, I would invite everybody on this committee and to email me if you'd like to take a crack at this. We can get you involved. We obviously need to have something ready to go by about the 9th, because it has to be done about a week before the SAC meeting. And the other thing that, other subcommittees have done has been to offer a quick briefing to whatever SAC members would like to come before the SAC meeting. So, we might be able to do that as well. Gretchen.
Thanks all, and really great work. Just thinking of some of the elements in the executive order of the master plan for aging, I'm wondering in the section particularly related to funding, if there is a role and if there is an appropriate construct to articulate both public funding from and through the various state entities that may be wishing to participate in this, or a line item in the budget or something in that way, but also thinking about private sector and philanthropic funding as calling that out as anchor points around that core. So just something as a little bit of a nuance of the particulars, so that it expresses something, I think, broader than simply a budget line item. And I'm wondering, David, if you may just, you don't need to comment necessarily, but maybe have a architecture for that relative to the project that you were just speaking of, in terms of what's that infusion of kind of public and private capital.
Happy to work with Laura to include.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura, David, and all of you who spent time looking at this, thinking about this, and please get in touch if you'd like to work on this a little bit more before September 8th. I'm going to now hand it off to Terry Shaw. We'll go to the next slide. And we will begin our discussion of the data dashboard.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We are, in fact, going to have time for a robust discussion on our data dashboard across all 4 goal areas. We've structured this conversation in 2 parts with a break in the middle. First part focusing on goals 1 and 2. Second part focusing on goals 3 and 4. And our desire here is really to bring everybody into the same, bring everybody onto the same page in terms of where we are for now on some preliminary indicators that we've identified in each of the goal areas. And this side, we've done this primarily on the basis of feasibility, what is feasible to do for our very first rollout in early December. And so I would like everybody to keep in mind as we go through the discussion that we are looking at December as our rollout for the version 1.0 of the dashboard, and it will be a living document that's going to keep, or tool that's going to keep evolving over time. So our conversation today is about the preliminary feasible measures that we've identified. Some of those are more baked, if you will, than others, and we'll show you some visualizations that have been done in some areas. In other areas, we don't have even good data sources identified. So we want to have that conversation. And again, we're going to break that up into 20 minutes per goal. We're going to go through goal by goal and allow time for discussion of each one. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Zia Aga, who's going to take us through the first goal.
Thank you, Terry. Before we begin, I'd like to thank both Carrie, Terry, and then Kim for her leadership in really moving this work along. We were sort of deep in the thick of doing this, and then COVID hit us. There was a break, but the teams reassembled, and a lot of work has happened in the last month and a half. As you all remember, all of you were part of the process of identifying some of the key measures that would help guide the work for the dashboard. A lot of work was done by a number of students at Berkeley in taking those measures and framing them into different sort of thematic areas. And then at West Health, we picked up from there to really start looking at, what are the measures? Are they publicly available? What's the update frequency for these measures? And then do we have the ability to track them year over year? We also then identified certain common themes, and I'll share those today with you. And then most importantly, developing narratives. These data dashboards are really there to tell a story. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, the picture should really tell that story. And so that work is happening already. We're developing some storylines around some of the key dashboard measures. And then of course, getting into the software development and whatnot. That's the last phase of these dashboards. As we engage, can you go to the next slide? I think as we engage in the discussion today, there are 4 key areas we need input and advice from the committee. Are the preliminary identified measures adequately capturing the sort of the vision of the goals and the objectives? Or are there significant priorities that are not reflected? To what extent are some of the goals sort of measures missing? So sort of gaps, and you will see that in the worksheet, that there are certainly some gaps in certain areas. And then when talking about gaps, it will be very helpful for us if people can also identify data sources that are unique that perhaps we could access that can help us fill those gaps. And then for any dashboard, you have to have certain targets or benchmarks. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to tell if you're making progress. And so at least starting the conversation, I don't think we can come out of this meeting today with identifying numbers, but if we can at least start to think about what should be the approach on setting these targets that we can all agree on are important and perhaps can be tracked over the next 10 years as we implement the master plan for aging. Next slide. We're going to start with sharing some of the measures we have for goal 1, the services and supports team, which was led on the research subcommittee by Gretchen Alkema from the SCAN Foundation, Donna Benton from USC, Kathleen Kelly from the Family Caregiver Alliance, and Catherine Geisman from UCLA. Next slide. Okay, so here's a quick sort of summary snapshot view of the goal 1 indicators and where we are with them. When you look at goal 1, there were 2 objectives that were guiding our work. Where will Californians have the help that they need to live in their homes and where they choose to age? And will we have support for the caregivers and loved ones who take care of them? Within each of these objectives, we want to identify person level and system level indicators. And simply put, a person level indicator is one where the data is collected at the person level. So individuals are responding or data is being collected at the individual person level. And system level indicators are really derived from data that is reported by systems, organizations, in this case, long-term care facilities. And you want to have a nice mix of both person and system level indicators because you really want to develop a program that's going to track them both and have policies that will influence both of those areas. If you look at objective 1.1 at the person level, there are 3 indicators and they can all be lumped into functional status. We all know that functional status is a big, big, big thing. It's a huge predictor of outcomes, of people well-being, and how they're going to progress through their different stages of life. Now, there's two things that you really would ideally want to measure. One is the need for these functional status activities, such as bathing, dressing, errands, ADLs and IADLs, so to say. But then more importantly, are those needs being met? Being practical, we are starting with identifying the needs because the data on that is very robust and available. And the data source we're using is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. This is a data source that is collected by the CDC. It's been around for over 50 years. So the data and the questions are really mature and stable. There's the ability to look at not just data in California, but also across the nation. And it's a very large data set, around 400,000 interviews every year. We hope to then supplement this in round 2, which will hopefully be next year, with data from CHIS, the California Health Interview Survey, which will help us identify the gaps in these needs being met. And so those 2 things really come together nicely, where you know what the needs are and how we're doing there, and what are the gaps in addressing those needs. And I'll show you a sketch of a dashboard that our team has created that shows the data on needs. At the system level, we focus on system level deficiencies in the safety area. Safety is a really important measure of how well we are taking care of our seniors. And there's some really robust data that is collected by the Office of Statewide Health Planning and CMS, Nursing Home Compare data sets. And we have access to that. And we're going to show 2 measures there in terms of deficiencies and then access. What are the number of licensed beds in different geographies in the state, and then what are their payment sources, which also helps us address some of the inequities and disparities in healthcare. The second objective is around caregiving. Now, much sparse data available on caregiving, but we're very lucky that AARP Foundation and AARP researchers have collected some really good data through their caregiving survey. And it's a national survey, but there's also a California component of that. And as a first cut, we are going to start to show what are the numbers of caregivers. We know that nationally there are over 40 million caregivers that are engaged in these activities. I want to show what is the status of that in California, but not just as a state, but county by county, zip code by zip code. And then what are some of the demographics of these caregivers? Again, looking at racial and income and other disparities in caregiving. We haven't identified the targets, but we hope to have the column around the 2030 target values completed before December 1. And by no means that these targets are going to be hard and fast. I think it's directional. I think we want to see certain directional change in these data points over time. And those targets are like mile markers that help guide us in that direction. Next slide. Okay, so here's an example of a data dashboard. This is the one that we have created for goal 1 around long-term care utilization and quality of care. In the big pane, you are seeing a picture of our state. Each of the dots is a long-term care facility, and we are modeling the deficiency rates for each of these facilities. And we're modeling 2 things. We're able to show you the safety deficiencies per bed, color-coded, where red is the highest number and green would be the lowest. We're also showing you on a grayscale, county by county, which counties are doing better than others as an aggregate. This quickly helps you identify the oranges and the sort of the yellow areas, which can help you focus on areas where you need to drive your attention towards improving some of the safety measures. At the top of the dashboard are a number of what I would say filters that help you choose and select different views. So you can choose different types of long-term care facilities. You can drill the data down by racial groups, like show me all the data for a certain minority. We can also look at the racial composition of each facility. So if a facility has more than 50% minorities versus only 10% minority, you can use the slider to highlight if there is a disparity in care by race. You can also say, well, just filter down and show me all the facilities that have a high deficiency rate of 5 and above. On the left-hand side, and when you do all those sort of filters, the race and age and other metrics will evolve. And so on the left-hand side, you're seeing some of the basic demographics that sort of anchor us about our state and the progress that we are making. So in terms of our racial composition, the payer type, which is so important in terms of healthcare policy and long-term services and support policy, and then of course the age composition of our state. Next slide, please. Okay, here is another dashboard. You'll notice that's a very similar layout, and we're going to do this on purpose to make all the dashboards across all the goals consistent, so the users as they're viewing them can very quickly get acclimatized to these data layouts. On the main right-hand pane, we are modeling the specific questions around ADL needs or functional needs like dressing, bathing, walking, climbing stairs. And we can model these over multiple years. We have chosen to go only 5 years back, but we could go further. And we're modeling right now, blue line is California and the orange line is all the other states. But we have the ability to select all the states in one visualization. So you can see all 50 states, or you can compare California to any other state that you want to. We also have the ability to look at where California ranks. So I think in general, we rank in the middle tier for all states in terms of reporting these functional difficulties. On the top, again, you've got certain sliders such as race, education, employment status, and income that really allow you to select certain characteristics of the population that you want to look at. Again, the idea being to explore disparities in delivery and disparities in needs across these really important indicators. And then on the left-hand side, you've got some of the basic demographics of our population: race, education, employment, and income. Can we go to the next slide? So this is where I'm going to hand off the discussion to Gretchen from SCAN Foundation, who's going to help lead the discussion with all of us on these 4 key areas and anything else that the committee would like to weigh in on. I really appreciate all of your feedback, and this is clearly, like Terry said, it's a work in progress. I do also want to thank both our data science team and the team from CDPH that have really been the anchors in getting all of this work done. So kudos to them for this Herculean task of pulling together a lot of data to help us with these initial prototypes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Zia. This is so powerful just to see the data come to life in the visuals that you and Terry and the CDPH team and all of the West Health support has made possible. So huge thank you for that. And I'll just start with a few opening comments, and then I'm certainly here to help foster a discussion. I think the thing that I'd like to start with first is just an acknowledgement that this is version 1, and I know that we anticipate many more versions, and so because I think it's easy to take a first blush look at this and say, are these the measures that we want to be measuring? And because there's so many factors to think about, how do we articulate success and change in measurement and success in such a large goal area, as people being able to have the kinds of supports they need to live well at home and the supports for family caregivers. And so I'm just really pleased to see what this is looking like as the beginning prototype and the beginning of the dashboard to come into being in December. And so I think, just tempering on what it means to have available data, what does it mean to have measures that define change and assess differences by all the different characteristics that we've talked about today. And a quick thank you to Dr. Lincoln for the discussion around the recommendations from the equity work group. And I just love seeing how that's the points of being woven into this process as well. I'd like to just acknowledge, mostly for the record, that what seems like a million years ago, on March 10th, and a few of us went and spoke to the Long-Term Services and Support Subcommittee about the proposed dashboard measures for this goal. And there is, in the Together We Engage website, underneath that committee meeting minutes, there's a presentation that has a whole series of proposed dashboard measures for this goal. And in that include kind of key considerations. And I think this is true for all of the goals. So I'll just do a little bit of level setting on what we'll see everything moving forward. Is that as the dashboard comes into being, that there's a consideration of broad data sources as has been discussed, content that aligns with the goals and objectives, and that there's respective contributions of population level as well as program level data, as well as that the dashboard really has potential to set that baseline, show those differences, and measure change in the landscape over time. And so kind of thinking about that, I really appreciate the version 1 measures that are here and start to describe the population at hand. And in just a moment, so I'm giving Catherine a little heads up for her to get ready to be off mute. I'd love for Catherine to take a moment to talk about what is coming forward, what is not available at this point in time to put in the data dashboard, but will be shortly, is the long-term services and supports module in CHIS. And so, because there are a number of different factors that talk about the environment for individuals and unmet need, and being able to measure unmet need, as well as a number of variables for caregivers. So I think looking at what will be coming shortly will help fill in a little bit of the items that I was thinking about, and our subcommittee was definitely thinking about, to populate how would we understand the kind of baseline of goal 1 and the measurement of change in that. And so the only thing I will share before I give it over to Catherine, she'll get her 2 minutes to talk about the LTSS module, just in terms of when we're expecting it, is I'm really pleased that the SCAN Foundation, along with the Commonwealth Fund, has funded AARP over a number of years to develop a long-term services and support scorecard that's nationwide, that looks at how all states rank on meeting a high-performing system of care for older people and people with disabilities and their family caregivers. And those measures, that data was supposed to come out in June and is now set to come out on September 24th. And as soon as I have information on that release Zoom webinar, I'll let everyone on this call know. But in that are some very particular measures around family caregiving, and they're broken out in a little bit different way. So there'll be something that could potentially be included in the version 1 going forward, or possibility even just acknowledging what California's rank is on that measure. going forward, so that we add a little bit more in terms of system dynamics underneath the objective 1.2 that's really about family caregivers. So with that, knowing we just have another couple minutes, I want to hand it over to Catherine Keatsman from UCLA to speak a bit about what, just a little bit of the flavor of the LTSS module and when we expect the data will come from that tool.
So this is Terry. I'm going to break in for just a moment, just to remind folks of where we are on our timekeeping. We're running a little long on this discussion, but I think we'll be able to manage it. But we have a lot of folks who want to jump in. So Catherine, we'll go to you first, and then Jeannie Parker-Martin, Jennifer Breen, Christopher Langston has his hands up, Kathleen Kelly, and Donna Benton, both of whom were Goal 1 Leads members as well. So we do want to hear from all of you, but please try to be mindful of time. Thank you.
Great, thanks. This is Catherine. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you, Gretchen. The California Health Interview Survey, just very briefly, we've been collecting data since 2001, and that's been used to inform a lot of state-level population health decisions. Starting in 2019, we developed and implemented a module follow-on survey that collects information on long-term services and supports and gets at some of these measures that are not yet on the dashboard, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to provide that data from the 2019-2020 LTSS survey by the end of October of 2021. And just as a reminder, this is a sample of 2,000 people who identify as having these sort of difficulties with ADLs and IADLs that we're concerned about. And we will be able to, we've drawn the sample from the 40,000 households that are surveyed for the CHIS data collection effort. So we're able to link data from the overall CHIS, which provides a wealth of information on health indicators, with specific questions on LTSS. And so these data are going to include information about unmet needs and adverse consequences of unmet needs, access to services, what people need, what they're getting, and also importantly, consumer experience with receiving care, if people are indeed receiving care. I think what's important to note is that with the population level survey, this really is a great counterpoint to data we're going to get from programs and from institutional settings, because it's going to let people know, it's going to let us learn about what's happening in the community, both for people who are connected to services, but importantly also we need to learn about people who are not connected and what their experiences are. This will be repeated again, this cycle in 2023 and 2024. And again, that full data set will be available at the end of October of 2025. So we have those two data points in time that we'll be able to look at. And I just want to quickly mention that there is also an in-depth qualitative study that's in between these two survey data collection events. So, and back to Dr. Lincoln's comments about the importance of having both quantitative and qualitative data. I think the qualitative data will also give us a lot of contextual rich information reflecting diversity of experiences for people with LTSS needs. So mindful of time, I'll move along and cede to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Terry, back to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Catherine. Jeannie Parker-Martin, you're up next. And I do have one more hand to add to the list, which is Ramon Castelblanc. So I'll add you after Donna, Ramon. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Gosh, thank you, Zia and everyone. This is such remarkable work, and it's so exciting to see it come to life. I also appreciate that you're using the AARP data because it is such a rich data point for us, and exciting, I think, to see that partnership at a local and national level, really. So I think that's terrific. One comment, and somewhat for perhaps all the public listeners, in the slide that was shown related to the dashboard indicators you put up. I think it's really critical that the long-term care facilities, it's noted that long-term care facilities don't just include skilled nursing facilities. In fact, that pull down list probably has the whole breadth of facilities that are either licensed or accessible in California. And so some people might be wondering, why did we just pick an indicator called long-term care facilities and it only shows really what is skilled nursing facilities. So that's to the point that was made earlier, that this is a living document and there's a lot of data that is accessible and there's much data that's not accessible currently. So I want us to keep that in mind as we continue to build out particularly those indicators, but I'm sure that every single dashboard will have real gaps since we haven't started collecting it yet. So that just comments to keep in our mindset as we continue to move forward.
Thank you, Jeannie. Jennifer Breen?
Hi. So first off, let me thank Terry and Zia. The dashboard looks amazing. I'm eager to get to play with it myself. One concern I had was that the patients by payment source for the long-term care data points was using the OSHPOD facility data. There's a known issue with the OSHPOD data in that what they call managed care lumps in Medi-Cal managed care as well as Medicare managed care. So to really get a good sense about the payer source and the relative level of payments for those recipients, you really need to look at a secondary data source, such as the 2018 audited Medi-Cal cost report data and/or the QASPA Word data, which would have the breakdown between the Medi-Cal fee-for-service versus the managed Medi-Cal days. I think it's an important thing to note because based on the numbers indicated, it seems to be about 10% off for the Medi-Cal portion of services. A second point that's just very minor is that as a colorblind person, the color scheme is absolutely inaccessible. So if there are maybe a more saturated color palette or additional details that could be added, like symbology or something like that, it would make it a lot more easier for people to actually understand those graphs, or not the graphs, but the map that had the dots with all of the deficiencies, etc. And that was it for me. Thank you so much.
Great. And thank you for that, both for the additional data sources and for the comment on accessibility, which is absolutely something that we will be focusing on before we put it out in a way that people can play around with, as you said. So I definitely appreciate that priority. Okay, next, Christopher Langston, actually, you're up.
Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge it's an outstanding volunteer effort for what the group did in creating the dashboard so far, and obviously all the caveats about the limitations of available data. But I think that's worth driving home. Goal 1.1 was something along the lines of people having the resources and tools available to help them live where they want. And so, you know, the data that are presented is, you know, disability IADL, ADL kind of limitations, and then, you know, the quality of nursing homes. And, you know, nobody wants to live in a nursing home virtually, so the relevance of that is unclear to me. And we don't know anything about what, you know, at this point is being offered to assist people with those ADL kinds of limitations. So, you know, if this is prototypical, the available data is going to be quite scant. And I think that's got to be thought about in terms of whether this exercise is actually going to get somewhere good, or what the costs are going to be to do follow-up data on these kinds of things. The one thing that did occur to me as a possible unused data source that might be helpful, at least at this level, and as important as quality of nursing homes in Nursing Home Compare, is just how many people are in different state-run Medi-Cal or near Medi-Cal kinds of programs. Just how many people by county are in home-delivered meals or IHSS or CBAS or whatever. Again, it doesn't mean that we're meeting people's needs, but at least it tells you, compared to how many people have a need in a county, say, or a city, how many people are getting some kind of service.
Great.
Thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
Christopher.
Chris, if I can just quickly comment, I think we definitely acknowledged about the system level measures, even just at the descriptive level, like you're talking about. And my sense of that is that the data weren't as clean at this juncture, even to get to some of those system elements in terms of counts of people inside of different programs at this version 1.0 point. And Terry, please correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I think that was definitely something to be added to the dashboard as soon as that level of specificity was available.
Yeah, Gretchen, if I can jump in, I think Chris is right. That level of data would really help inform at a more program level. To however to access that data, we need to have some agreements with these different programs to allow us to look at their data sets. And I think while that work is underway, it may not be feasible to get it by December. So agree.
That doesn't seem right. I mean, given this is a governor level priority and all agencies are supposed to be pitching in under Secretary Galley, I don't understand why agency data is not being made available.
So one component of the dashboard that we are not showing here, but that is also being built out, are some demographics. And some of those descriptors in terms of the population, not necessarily the programs, but the populations, will be included there. So some of what you are suggesting may come in that layer of data points. But if there are specific, well, I was asked actually, why don't we hold on that thought? Because as you see additional measures in the other goal areas that may help to clarify some of this. Okay, in the interest of time, Kathy Kelly, you were next in line.
Yes, thank you. This is not a data point that would be in the December display for sure. But I just want to circle back and say some of these other program area data, service area data will be coming up, as well as what Catherine indicated, like in the CHIS. For the California Caregiver Resource Centers, data, we have only limited data this year that we could share. But in this current fiscal year, at the end of the fiscal year, we estimate between 7,000 and 8,000 caregiving families across the state with a broad diversity. And what's more important is that it actually, our caregivers are of all income levels, but primarily middle income, which is also an area that we don't have a lot of information on. Everything that we report on, practically speaking, is a Medicaid population. So I just wanted to make mention of that's sort of a coming piece of information that could be added to this goal 1.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Jeannie, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, just I want to underscore something Chris said, and you said it so eloquently, Chris. I really appreciate it. That the data just doesn't exist. So that's why the data isn't in there. For example, in AL, right, assisted living communities right now, there are about 170,000 residents, give or take, some number like that. There's no data about safety and quality in those organizations, for example, in the same way that we have it for skilled nursing facilities. Even though people don't want to live in skilled nursing facilities, a lot of people do choose to move into AL. So I think that is a very important data point. And so back to the, our short-term, long-term range of opportunity here, we might need to start to bucket what is it that should be done first versus in 4 years versus in 8 years versus in 10 years. Because we can't do everything at once, but some data should absolutely be collected now or sooner rather than later, I should say. It's been missing for a long time.
Okay, thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and push us through to goal 2 We will be encroaching, well, pushing back our break time by a little bit, but we will do our best to move along quickly so that we preserve our break and also allow time for all the topics to be addressed. So for goal 2, I want to recognize that we have 4 incredible leads on goal 2 from the research subcommittee: Laura Karstensen, Stacy Moore, Jeannie Parker Martin, and David Ragland. And they also, I know, have been involved in the goal 2 work group on the policy recommendation side. So there's a lot of active development that's happening in this goal area as we speak, and a lot of great work that has been done. And so you will see that we have some preliminary indicators identified, but there's a lot more work to be done, to just to say it out loud. And Stacy Moore is going to offer us some thoughts about some of those possibilities. So let's go to the next slide. So at a high level, I just want to note that, like you saw on the other slide, we are trying to map out for each objective some person level and system level indicators. And in the realm of goal 2, of course, we have objectives around the built environment, and we have essentially objectives around the social environment. And so within the built environment, we have a couple indicators around housing and transportation that have been identified preliminarily, but we still need some good data sources for those. And in the social and civic engagement, we do have some indicators that we can leverage from Let's Get Healthy California. That's what LGHC means, Let's Get Healthy California, which of course is put together by our partners at the California Department of Public Health. And again, I do want to acknowledge all the fantastic work that our partners at CDPH and West Health have been doing around all of this indicator work. We really do appreciate that partnership. I also want to acknowledge that we, as Zia mentioned earlier, we had done a lot of work to identify a humongous pool of candidate measures, and that work actually was done by candidate indicators, and that work was actually done by a group of students. And one of those, Caitlin Ruppel, is on the line with us today. Thank you, Caitlin, for your work. Nate Bohm-Levine and Irie Liu were also instrumental in that. So I just want to thank everybody for all the work that's been done. So I'm not going to go into the details of these particular indicators because I want to give Stacy Moore an opportunity to talk about, let's go to the next slide. Back in February, she had done some great work at putting together some indicators. This is from a February slide. Of course, a lot of work has been done since then. And Stacy actually provided some materials along with the other meeting materials. They're not represented in the slides, but you all do have access to them. They were sent out with the meeting materials. So please, I encourage you to take a look at those. And Stacy, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to kick it off to you to kick off our discussion. We can move to the next slide so everybody has the discussion items in front of them. Stacy?
Right. Yes, thank you, Terry. And I want to add my thanks, as others have, to both for you, to Zia, and the incredible West Health team, and everybody involved who's working on the data dashboard. The things that we've seen are just really, really great, thinking just even from a 1.0 version. So thank you for your great work. And I want to acknowledge my Goal 2 teammates who are also on the call. Please jump into the conversation as we discuss the questions on screen here. I want to provide a bit of framing with regards to where we are versus, as Terry mentioned, that original round from back in February of potential indicators, and just where we are now with the work that has been on parallel tracks with the Goal 2 writing team and the research subcommittee now coming to a point where we can actually start to pair up and think about what exactly are the right measures and indicators relative to the goals that are now in the Goal 2 recommendations. Before I dive too deeply into indicators or measures, I really first want to just acknowledge how complex and multifaceted the Goal 2 area is. Livable communities and purpose contains housing, transportation, social participation, parks and public spaces, communication. So really we're talking about a broad range of issues that have a broad range of sub-issues underneath them. And when you're thinking in terms of how not only interconnected these issues are, but how complex they are, and looking at factors from affordability to accessibility, to equitable access across population groups, and really so much more. There's a host of measures that we could look at related to this. And one concern that I've voiced is that, that again, understanding we're at a 1.0 version and that we cannot measure everything. Looking at some of the discrete aspects of an issue for some of the dashboard measures means that we may miss the bigger picture on an issue. And so I do have concern with that. And again, totally understand that we're looking to elevate a handful of measures to the dashboard, but just wanted to put that concern out there. So as far as the discussion questions are concerned, if you can go back to that slide really quickly, and I will be referencing, as Terry mentioned, a side document that was provided as a handout to everyone. So if you have the ability to look at that at the side, you might want to glance through that. I'll just note that there's some green shading in there, which indicates that those are potential measures that have been proposed earlier in the last slide as part of the 1.0 version, and they're either the same or similar enough in the spreadsheet of indicators that I've provided. And the one thing is that as noted previously, there's a lot of missing data. We are looking at sometimes measurement points that lack a data source, and sometimes a data source would need to be identified. In other cases, there are pathways to collecting this data that we've identified for future collection, and those are noted as available, but this is a working list, and nowhere near, I should say, anything proposed for a final list. So some of the measures that I do want to speak to with regards to the first question around are they an adequate snapshot? So some of the measures that are currently proposed mainly speak to availability of certain features or services. One example would be the number of senior centers or YMCAs or community centers, or perhaps even just the number of affordable housing units that are available. These might speak to general availability, but there are other factors with regards to placement. Where are those features, those community resources actually available in California and in communities across the state? And so some of these are minimum bar type of indicators where we're lacking a measure that could speak to how well the available services actually meet the need. So even thinking about the number of affordable housing units that are available, that doesn't really tell you much if you're not pairing it with actual data that showcases the need relative to availability. So that's one example. So that, again, the handout that I provided lists some potential measures that could augment what has already been identified to that. And really quickly, just gonna try and comment on a few of these other questions and really want to open it up for discussion for the group. But some of the gaps that are identified that are tied specifically to Goal 2 recommendations, do you have actual timelines for being able to assess progress for these data points in some of the actual recommendations with, say, a 5-year benchmark or a 5-year time frame for being able to collect some of those data, or to be able to access it? So depending on the measure, there might be an existing pathway for data collection or augmentation, such as the transportation measures that are listed in that spreadsheet. There's a reference there to the fact that the data that the data points that we're proposing actually could be collected through existing coordinated human services public transit plans that are approved through Caltrans. Now that this data isn't currently being collected, but that's a vehicle, that's a potential collection vehicle for those points. And so some of the actual recommendations within Goal 2 identify target dates for when those data might be available based on adoption and implementation of the master plan recommendations. So with regards to the missing, available data sources, I think some of the data that we're missing is because we're looking at some different factors that we want to propose. Some of which are more qualitative measures as opposed to quantitative. I'll speak to transportation. A lot of the data that has been collected in the past might speak to how the system works as opposed to really the person-centered approach that we're seeking to really develop. And so some of that data just simply doesn't exist. And we need to, as a part of the recommendation process, there are recommendations for adding qualitative data measurements to some of those more quantitative data that currently exist on things such as cost per trip and things of that nature. So looking at the indicator list, some of those really speak more to the system level, and that's, again, we're lacking the person-centered data. But one example I'll just pull out are, are accessible transportation trips from disparate agencies commingled with appropriate cost allocation being applied? That seems, more of a question that's posed, but really it's speaking to looking at the transportation data in a different way as opposed to a system approach. This is still system level data, but looking to see how coordinated and how effective for the actual recipients of those transportation services that measurement would be. So I don't want to take up all of our time just with some general comments about the list of indicators that are our working list that's proposed here, but I will also, just one last note with regards to missing data. We're also lacking in this list, one area of the Goal 2 report focuses on communications. So one area that we're lacking data in is as far as a measurement for this is access to affordable broadband and high-speed internet services for older adults across the state. So adding that in, as a measure. So in addition to self-reported measures that speak to social participation like civic engagement and voting rates, there are other measures, whether it's regards to adults in the workforce, older adults volunteering, different things that we really need to keep top of mind as we're trying to look at, again, these very distinct issue areas across livable communities and how they intersect with each other to showcase how livable California's communities are truly becoming over a time frame. And lastly, before I open it up to the rest of the group, is that we've talked in previous research subcommittees about linking perhaps to the livability index as one means of not recreating the wheel, but having data available that already at the community level that looks at a variety of not only community features, but policies that are in effect that promote livability and enable adults to age in place. And so that's something I believe that's still on the table for discussion, is how might the data dashboard link to the livability index as an opportunity to dive deeper at the community level into a broader array of specific data points across domains that might not be available in the first version of the data dashboard that we're looking at now. So with that, I'll open it up to team members for comment and additional points of clarification.
We do have a couple minutes before we're planning to take our break. So if there are any committee members that would like to chime in.
You did a great job, Stacy. I think you
Stacey.
outlined it very well.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Okay. Seeing no hands up, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Maria to put us on break, and then we'll reconvene.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are going to reconvene our session, and I think I'll pass it off to Terry to keep moving us along.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for rejoining us, and I hope you had a refreshing break, brief as it was. We are now going to move into our discussion of goals 3 and 4. And I will again turn it back over to Zia for discussion of goal 3, and then I'll be back with you for discussion of goal 4. Zia, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Terry. Can we move to the next slide? Again, I would like to, acknowledge the colleagues who are part of the Goal 3 work group from the Research Subcommittee, Janet Frank from UCLA and Shireen McSpadden from San Francisco County Department of Aging. Can you move forward to the next slide? So unlike Goal 1, in Goal 3, we had a plethora of both data sources and indicators that could be looked at, both at the person level and system level. And as we thought about Goal 3, it was really important to have a good representation of behavioral health, oral health, and physical health. And then, of course, from the well-being perspective, things that matter for seniors and the community. Objective 3.1 is that the Californians will live in communities with policies and programs that promote well-being throughout our lifespan. And as we thought about well-being, obviously mental health and depression and cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's come to top of our mind. And we have good data for those conditions, and we can model them. In terms of access to healthcare services, HPSA creates a score, which is a composite of both access to a provider, but not just access in terms of a provider that is available, but also distance that is needed to travel to get to the provider, and insurance. And so those HPSA scores can be used to model true access from a person level perspective to providers. And then of course there's the shortage areas, and we can model those for both primary care, dental care, and mental health. In fact, we'll show you a graphic from OSHPD data on primary care providers in the state of California. This is also important to recognize that the shortages are sort of spread out to really impact the disadvantaged, the rural populations and low-income populations the most. And so there are disparities in where the providers are located, and we need to address that. We also want to look at Objective 3.2, which really is access to affordable, accessible healthcare that is senior-friendly and dementia-friendly and disability-friendly. That's a huge area. Yeah. Now, rather than boil the ocean on that, we sort of stuck to picking some key programs and key areas where we have good data, and also where our partners from CDPH have done some tremendous work on their Let's Get Healthy dashboard. So we propose to model, again, behavioral health services that are available and utilization of those services through the specialty mental health services data set. That is very comprehensive and gives us access to all kinds of behavioral health services in the county, by county level. We want to look at PACE as a model of care, but not just PACE, also adult daycare programs and access to PACE across different counties, and then the number of people who are eligible, which is far more than the number who get services today. We want to look at hospital level utilization by seniors, recognizing that there's a tremendous opportunity to improve care, to make sort of hospitals and emergency rooms more age friendly. And so looking at geriatric ED visits and also, work that, again, CDPH has done on identifying preventable hospitalizations for seniors, hospital readmission rates and the variation across that from city to city and state counties. So we will be able to track those in terms of showing, again, where we are today, and then what are some of the target values that we all agree we should get to over the future. Can we go to the next slide? So here's just a very brief sketch, highlighting the population data for primary care physician. Then we'll be doing similar ones for dental and mental health service areas. The blue is considered less than 2,000 population per physician. And this is all people, not just seniors. And then reds are where there's more than 2,000 residents per physician. So this is one sort of sketch that the team has been now working to really further expand into cities and geographies, but also do much more resolution on different types of providers, including behavioral health and dental health services. Recognizing that for dental health and behavioral health, there are much more disparities in access to care for seniors, which have been, of course, highlighted during the current pandemic. So this is aligned with our workforce goal. I don't want to speak to this one without Janet's input. Janet, do you want to help us here? But there's tremendous opportunities moving forward to collect more data on behavioral health services, and specifically the integration of those services with mental health, to really have all seniors and people with disabilities have access to that level of care. And Janet can, in her remarks, sort of highlight more on that. So I'm not going to go into the details on this slide. But this is definitely things that we are looking at acquiring in the future. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where sort of I think there's an opportunity for the group to help us identify the key priority areas and indicators that we have right now and how to move them along. Again, recognizing this is that data dashboard version 1.0, but there's tremendous opportunities to sort of use this as our baseline and then grow from there. I think many of these indicators can also get lumped together. So we don't lose all the valuable data, but also don't sort of crowd out the dashboard with too much information. And then what are some of the person or system level goals or objectives that are not being addressed by this current prototype? And then what should be our approach for setting targets and benchmarks, as recognized that those targets and benchmarks are really going to help us assess performance over the next 10 years. And then would love to get feedback on data sources. You guys have unique resources, unique ideas. Please tell us right now, email us. Happy to sort of chase down those leads.
So we do, thank you, Zia. We do have Janet on the line now. Janet, are you, would you like to speak to the behavioral health indicators?
Thank you. I've actually been on, I just didn't have my video on for some reason. Sorry about that. So the slides you see here are just the way that we're collecting data right now at the state level. The first one is for a very unique program that is sponsored by the Mental Health Services Act called the Full Service Partnership. And the Data Collection and Reporting System, or DCR, collects the data that for the Full Service Partnership allows providers to put together any type of services, all that it takes to help people recover. So this is a great example of linking into services that address the social determinants of health, such as housing and employment and other things like that. It's delivered, the Full Service Partnership does not include very many older adults, although it does include some, but it is a great example. And so I think something that we might want to take a look at as to how they've been able to do this. The next person level is really primarily for different types of services. Right now, we have different kinds of data for mental health services, and then we have other kinds of data sources for the substance abuse services. So this gives us some examples of that. And then there also is a a client survey about consumer outcomes, which I think is very useful and used uniformly across all the counties. And then finally, there's a very good data set called the California Uniform Application Behavioral Health Report for data that is reported on the block grants back to SAMHSA. So that at a system level, I think is a good data source. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Janet. I see that Chris Langston, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks to the team for their excellent work. But I do think, you know, I love PACE, and I have a, you know, real personal connection to serious and persistent mental illness. But I don't think for our purposes, either of those things are particularly important indicators for, you know, where we are in terms of trying to track the health and the quality of healthcare and support and services for older adults. So there are 16,000 people in PACE in California, and there are, you know, 1.2 million duals, and I'm not sure what proportion, maybe somebody knows, are nursing home eligible. But, you know, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction, and tracking how many people are in PACE or how many PACE programs is, I think it misses the point. It's just, what if it doubled or tripled? It would still be a tiny, tiny fraction of the people we need to help. So it's just not a good measure. I think the number of older adults receiving Medi-Cal, serious and persistent mental illness services has a lot of the same features. That's not the problem that older adults you know, are really suffering from in a major way. Obviously, a small number of people suffer intensely, but you know, it's the depression and anxiety that does not get into the specialty mental health system at all. That is the, you know, very serious common cold of aging and mental health. So, you know, I think we need to go back and not just focus on, you know, where we have programs, and not just focus on, you know, things we love like PACE, but think, you know, harder about what are good indicators of quality of care. I would suggest, as I did, you know, earlier, really low-hanging fruit, like prevalence of diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease and medical records, use of CMS Medicare benefits like the annual wellness visit, or similar things that, you know, we know should be used, and are indicators of how well our healthcare system is caring for older adults.
I just want to add that, to Chris's comment, that there is, on a programmatic level, an excellent program available that that we have many kind of best practices within the Aging Network, utilizing state public mental health funds to deliver prevention and early intervention programs, including peer counseling and depression screening and other kinds of things like that, that are linked and being delivered through the Aging Service Network. And several organizations, daycare centers and others, have received contracts to deliver services through the prevention and early intervention program. And I think there's a lot of promise to address, you know, very important behavioral health problems that may not be yet at that serious mental illness stage through the prevention and early intervention types of data at the county level.
Okay, next up we have Jeannie Parker-Martin.
Yeah, I want to thank you first of all for the presentation. I want to comment on PACE, and I would suggest that there probably are a significant number of programs in California that haven't really expanded or accelerated because of a lack of data. I'm not quite sure what the real problem with PACE expansion actually is, but I do think that there might be a bucket of programs that fall into this category of programs that haven't really accelerated and yet may expose some really great outcomes and benefits to the overall population. So we might want to consider at some point, and again, when is the question and how much money is available, but we might want to consider this bucketed group of small programs. And I actually think PACE may be even less. I think it just crossed its 10,000 mark. So I hate to say it, but it may even be less. But Adult Day is another example where great program, necessary potential outcomes, but small population of people. So how do we consider that in this master plan? How do we consider the emotional and behavioral benefits, the economic benefits, both to some comments that were made earlier regarding caregiving and others, even though they haven't accelerated at the rate at which we might have expected. And so something we should keep somewhere in our documents, and maybe this is a footnote to something, or maybe it's an actual statement. What are the 10 highly valued programs that haven't overperformed by volume, but may do very well by outcomes? So just something for us to consider.
Thank you, Jeannie. And I do want to remind folks that in prior discussions around the dashboard, we've shown you that the framework that we have includes these key indicators, but then also has the ability to add in some contextual information and or references to other data sources or other examples of, programs or efforts that don't yet have a robust data base behind them. And so we can't show them in an indicator sort of way, but we can use it to provide, we can point to those to provide context and resources to help people who are using the dashboard have a richer understanding of the issue at hand. So that what you were just discussing might be a candidate for that type of an approach. So just reminding folks that that's another tool we have in our toolkit to consider making use of. Jennifer Breen, you were next.
Hi, I just wanted to again thank everybody, and I wanted to echo Christopher Langston's comments. And, when I saw that, looking at the behavioral health aspects, looking at the specialty mental health specifically isn't really hitting what the behavioral health aspects are for maybe this community, especially since a lot of people with, maybe lower levels of dementia, Alzheimer's and things like that, they don't actually end up in specialty mental health. They don't qualify for those services. They're not part of those programs. And I'm not sure about those data sets. They might include those kind of characteristics, but my understanding was that they don't really end up in those programs. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands up on this topic. So in the interest of time, although we are making progress, I'm going to go ahead and push us forward to goal 4. Okay. So again, I want to acknowledge the research committee, subcommittee members who have been leading on the goal 4 area. Karen Lincoln, who we heard from earlier, Nari Ree, and Ramon Castelblanc have all been eagerly engaged on this topic, and unfortunately have been, this topic has been particularly shortchanged, I'll say, as a result of the break that we took due to the obviously much needed COVID response. So we have not had an opportunity to dig into goal 4 in this research committee in depth up to this point. And so you will see that we have a lot of ideas on the table for folks to discuss, and we really look forward to your feedback. And Nari is going to really give us a great overview of some potential indicators. I'm going to give a very high level sort of small subset, and then I'll turn it over to her. So next slide. Okay, so like goal 2, goal 4 has quite a variety of issues and realms within it. And so in fact, this is the one goal area that actually has 3 objectives within it rather than 2. So we've taken a crack at identifying some person and system levels in objective 4.1, which is focused on economic security, and objective 4.2, which is focused on protection from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And the indicators that we have chosen or preliminarily chosen really have to do with building on the Goal 4 recommendations to focus on the Elder Economic Index and the cost of living, and you heard Karen Lincoln refer to that earlier as well. We've taken that to heart and really looked to build on those data sources in order to look at the financial well-being of older adults. And in terms of the objective 4.2, you know, we're having a harder time finding data on that. So we'll appreciate hearing from Nari and from all of you on ideas for more sources on those. But quickly, I did want to note this because this came up earlier in the conversation. In addition to the California Health Interview Survey and the Elder Economic Index that we are trying to leverage for this goal area, we do also have some an indicator here that is built on program data. In this case, older adults enrolled in CalFresh, and also on the economic one, the ratio of SSI to an SSP to the Elder Economic Index. So we are trying to leverage program data where we can, and I did want to note that the Health and Human Services Agency has a data subcommittee that has now started forming an aging data work group to focus on exactly these types of issues across the agency, across all the programs that touch older adults. And so we are looking for that to be a vehicle to really enrich our program data capabilities focused on older adults over time. And so this is a preliminary nod in that direction, but obviously there's much more that can be done. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Nari to discuss some alternatives or additional options for all of us to consider. Nari?
Great, thanks. So actually, I'll go over this quickly, but on this slide, it's actually mostly redundant with what I'm assuming the staff picked out. I'm still a little not clear on the process and the decision-making process for this. So there's essentially what sort of the staff and the consultants came up with, and then there's what sort of the subcommittee on economic security came up with. So I think just kind of thinking about the economic security goals, when it comes to thinking about economic security, you've got a few different dimensions. And one is obviously, you know, income and income adequacy measured by things like the Elder Index and the federal poverty level. But as highlighted in the Goal 4 recommendations, the policy recommendations, there are also considerations around what are the various resources that people have to supplement their income or to generate retirement income, whether it's retirement assets or you know, state and federal programs. So one thing I want to highlight is we had a little, I think we're sort of proposing a different data source and thinking about some of this. If you want to do a detailed demographic analysis, CHIS I want to say CHIS has some wonderful resources in terms of diving deep into kind of health and caregiving issues. But it's limited by sample size, and we actually do have the American Community Survey, which has a much larger sample size that allows us to dive into you know, various sort of race, gender crosscuts, right? And also, honestly, has much more accurate income data. So insofar as we're concerned about income issues, I'm really pushing for using the ACS for this analysis. And then the last thing on this list, what we proposed, there's a lot of overlap in terms of what we proposed and what ended up in the staff list. And so that last line, it looks like it was pasted over. It's essentially a sort of a take-up rate. What it's supposed to be is a take-up rate looking at the number of seniors who have food insecurity, right? And then essentially say how many of them are being served by CalFresh. Next slide, please. So I won't go over this in detail, but again, a lot of different elements of economic security where there is data to measure it, right? So one is looking forward. You know, people don't just sort of arrive at retirement with retirement income, right? They build retirement resources over a lifetime of work. And so really looking at what's happening in the life cycle, just especially leading up to retirement in terms of workplace retirement benefit access and how much people have in terms of both dedicated retirement savings and overall financial assets and household net worth is really, really, really important. Just one thing on that is that that's available, fortunately for a state like California, at the state level, but not so much at the county level. Also looking at the impact of medical debt and the impact of caregiving, especially unpaid caregiving, right, in terms of household finances, right, in terms of lost earnings. And some of that data is available from SHIS. So I think, and then another kind of important dimension is housing, which overlaps with goal 2. And again, there are some good indicators in terms of the housing cost burden based on the ACS, and also comparing that to the inventory of affordable housing that's available in California. And finally, another important element of economic security is work opportunity. And again, there's really good data out there as well. And then finally, I think where we really had a sort of a data deficit was in sort of the safety and public disaster response area. So finally, I think, is that it, or is there more? You had, okay. So there was a lot here. So one of the things we want to highlight is that caregiving, right? Most caregiving is done by unpaid caregivers, right? And that also has tremendous economic consequences, and that's something that we really need to be paying attention to. It's not just people who are in sort of the paid caregiver system. So looking at the resources that are there, and this is system level data to relieve caregivers, both in terms of psychological stress and in terms of financial stress. And then another major point is with regard to the buildup of retirement assets. There actually is a statewide program, and I want to sort of go rah-rah, right? The state is launching a statewide automatic IRA for workers in firms with 5 or more employees who don't have access to a workplace retirement plan, like a 401k or pension, right? There is an employer mandate that eventually, hopefully, will be enforced, right, for the program to take full effect. And so they're rolling it out by firm size with the largest firms. Their deadline is coming up actually in September, and then the next year it's going to be 2 years more until there's full rollout for all firms above 5 or more employees. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see the data come out of that system in terms of, you know, how many people are actually saving, how much are they saving, because this actually is something that will have a direct impact on the state budget in terms of what the state needs to spend on supporting seniors in the future. I think that's it for this list. So again, there's a big gap here, and I would just really welcome any ideas in this arena. I'm recalling what happened during the rolling blackouts last year, right, in terms of people who were stuck at home without power, who really needed power for medication and to breathe. So insofar as if I think this is a place where it would be really important to compile some data in terms of actually helping the state and helping the utilities prepare, right, and public safety agencies prepare better for the next go around.
Okay, I think thank you, Nari. Thank you very much. And thank you not only for the presentation, but for all the background work that you did to pull together a really robust set of potential indicators for us. So now we've got a lot of folks who would like to weigh in, which is fantastic. First in queue is Jeannie Parker-Martin.
Thank you, Nari. That was really very helpful. If we go back to the very first presentation today regarding data that's available, There is actually, there are a lot of requirements related to disaster preparedness in housing, care, and services for older adults in different settings. So there might be an opportunity to align, at least initially, some of that data, even though it may not be as broad-based as we might want for the state, but it might be a starting point similar to what we saw earlier in the SNF information that's available through OSHPD. So that might be a starting point just in terms of looking at some of the information gaps and regulatory requirements for disaster preparedness.
Great, thank you, Jeannie. Next is Gretchen Holcomb.
Great, thank you. Really awesome work, Goal 4 team, and thanks, Nari, for walking us through it. I think on the objective 4.3, I was wondering if there might be something from the Office of Emergency Services that has something about, and I'm just making this up to be completely honest, but something like cities that have disaster preparedness planning that even mention older adults in any way, shape, or form. Might be a nice system measure in that realm. That gets to something I think bigger than just the care delivery system is a possibility. I was also thinking that there are a couple of measures that were related to service provision of things like the respite care and the caregiver resource center. The question for me in my mind was, would they be better served in a dashboard relative to another goal as opposed to Goal 4? And this maybe gets to a bigger question that I'll just lay out for Terry and Carrie and Kim, is that there may be some goals that really have a nice equal balance of a person level goal or person level measure and a system level measure. And there may be some that just weight a little bit heavier towards either the system side or the person side in the early versions of the dashboard. And I was just thinking Goal 4 might be, because of the richness of the data that we actually have on people in terms of their retirement security, not so much necessarily the safety kind of the 4.2, but there just may lends itself to be more person related at this early juncture. And in many ways, I still think that's okay. Showing data gaps are critical for us to really think about what are the kind of data that we want to show progress in the future.
Thank you, Gretchen. Jennifer Breen is up next.
Hello. I just want to kind of echo, first off, great job, Nari. I thought that your breakdown was great. I liked your analysis about the ACS versus the CHIS and the robustness of that survey versus CHIS. One thing as far as the emergency preparedness as a systematic goal, or sorry, systematic measure, I'm wondering if there is data available. I don't know about it, but if there is, about seniors involved in various home and community-based services programs, MSSP, CBAS, et cetera, who, if they have currently active, been assessed for their needs within an emergency preparedness situation and have a plan in place in case of those situations. It would be a great thing to leverage those programs to have them make sure that they have that planning in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy.
Thank you. So again, kudos, great job. One thing that I did want to highlight that seemed to be a missing point was around fraud, as far as assets being, the assets of older adults that they've worked so hard to accumulate, being stripped away from them, and knowing how much older adults are targeted for fraud specifically. I think that perhaps looking at that as incidents of fraud reported, even though we know that a lot goes unreported, unfortunately, and there are a lot of factors involved in that, but just wanted to elevate that as one consideration to take a look at.
That's great, thank you.
Great. Chris Langston.
Thank you. Again, excellent work. And probably it shows that I know a lot about the others, and I'm a critical person, that this seemed really, really good. So the others are probably really, really good too. Just building on Gretchen's observation, I think one of the things we've thought a lot about is agencies or counties who have registries of older people and those with disabilities who are unlikely to be able to evacuate by themselves. So another sort of structural measure at a very broad level. Similarly, in the financial abuse situation, I think you could look at financial institutions that have policies and procedures in place that protect people. I ran into that myself recently where, a bank reached out to me and said, is this really supposed to happen? And I'd never seen that before. So that was kind of cool. And in terms of economic security straight up, I think 72% of older Californians own their residence. And I think sort of home equity might be another thing to track if it's not already implied. Not being an economist, I can miss stuff, but what their level of equity is. And of course, breaking that down across race and ethnicity, I think would be really important.
Yeah, I want to speak to that. So that is folded under kind of the household wealth, household net worth piece. But there's also, without actually getting into kind of the levels, the issue of rising senior mortgage debt, right? So more people have housing, but more and more people are going into retirement with a lot of mortgage debt. So that's another piece.
Okay, Ramon Castelblanc.
Yes. So I'm not sure how much this goes under goal 4, or maybe we're covering it under goal 1. But since most caregiving comes from family caregivers, I think it's really critical that we make sure that that part of the system is working, and to what extent. Now, in terms of affordability, since that is one of the factors here in number 4, reduce long-term care costs, I think a lot of that is assuming that family members are going to be able to deliver this care. However, if we don't have any way of measuring how likely we're making that, then I don't know that we're, doing a good job of measuring the dangers to the family long-term, to the family caregiver situation. So that's why I proposed, at least tracking respite care or something like that, just to see where it is and how much there is, because to the extent we fail there, then we let the family caregiving system fall apart. And I think it's also important to look at instrumental variables, rather than just outcomes. I mean, this bad number goes up or that bad number goes up, and then we go, oh, what do we do? Well, how about if we have a number that measures things we know would help, and then, instead of waiting for bad numbers to go up, we try to make good numbers go up. We need more respite care or something like that. I mean, maybe this whole issue would be covered under goal 1, and that'd be great, but I sure don't want us to lose sight of what really is the heart of the long-term care system. One other question procedurally, the team gets together, we make a list, we send it in, and then we see a slide that tells us, what's acceptable. What's the process? What happens after we send it in, and who makes up that final slide?
So we've mentioned that we have a team, including folks at the California Department of Public Health and the West Health Institute and CDA, all working together on the sort of day-to-day, heavy lifting of actually producing visualizations. Our work is informed by all of the input that all of you have provided, as well as other stakeholders who have weighed in, as well as experience that everybody on the work group has in building dashboards like these. And as I mentioned, we are also working with an agency data subgroup to try and align this dashboard with other dashboarding efforts at the agency level. So it's really a lot of different inputs that are going into it. And as we've said, we're going to take first best shot, and we're going to acknowledge all along the way that we're going to keep improving it over time. I do see that Donna Benton has her hand up. So Donna?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing in the ACS database. I think that that is going to be helpful for trying to look at across our income levels, particularly as we keep discussing that we don't have very many things that are looking at middle incomes. And I had early on raised my hand, and then you answered the question around we should be looking at affordable housing and the percent that people are spending on either rent or mortgage payments. So I really appreciate that. I still think that many of our indicators are still kind of looking at that, the lower income level. So I still think we are missing out a lot of indicators for our middle income families. But you want to say something? Nori?
Yeah, I do. Thank you for bringing this up because I had it in the back of my head and you just reminded me, which is regarding the middle income. So right, there's a lot of focus on the bottom. There's also the issue of downward mobility and the sagging middle. It's a huge issue when it comes to retirement. Yeah. And federal poverty level, even 200% of federal poverty level or elder index isn't going to measure that. Really the measure for that is income replacement rates. And again, that is something that we could, that's a little bit harder, but that is something that we could look at in terms of what should really be the goal, right? And also what's happening in terms of the impact of sort of the donut hole in the labor market when you get older, which is you get shuttled into, you can stay in the really high skilled jobs or you get shuttled into the low wage jobs. There are no real middle income jobs for older workers, right? Those are really hard to come by. What's the impact of that? So I do think that there's a lot of work to be done in that arena, which is looking at this whole issue of middle class downward mobility.
And I think it's also going to be particularly important for our ethnic populations.
Right.
It's really going to be harder.
I mean, yes. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just realized there's a whole other thing. Another thing I really want to flag is what is happening with, especially within the Latino community, people who don't have access to Social Security, citizenship rights, Medicare, all of those services, especially in the Central Valley, right? What's going to happen? And I do think that don't know about data sources for that, but just as an economic security issue for California, that's a really huge one to be on the lookout for.
So thank you so much. I really want to say, I mean, I'm glad you brought in a new data source.
So this is Kim. I have the unfortunate job of cutting off this very rich conversation. 1 minute of observation before we go to public comment and ask Maria to begin. We have 38 participants in the public sector, I see, and 1 hand already up, so I'll be very quick. Just do want to speak to process. So the process, this is absolutely the stakeholder recommendation part of the process. So your recommendations are the drivers. The staff at CDA and our consultant team are here to take some of the workload off of people in terms of writing documents and preparing slides, but this is absolutely your recommendation. So as was said earlier, September 15th is the final SAC meeting. So recommendations from this committee should come in reflecting your voice. The next phase will be the administration development of their work plan, of our master plan, informed by those recommendations, informed by public comment, informed by legislative roundtables with our partners in the legislature. And so what comes out in December will look different from what is received from the stakeholders in October. That is part of the process. And that of course engages the cabinet work group and the governor's office themselves. So we hope that you come in very clear and strong, as the LTSS subcommittee did in May with their report. But the research subcommittee similarly has a clear voice on their, and then the work will continue in the administration to carry that forward, to bring that best thinking. But that is the role of staff and consultants, is to support the stakeholder process and then to support the administration process. So happy to continue to address that, want your voices loudly heard, and just appreciate understanding. It's been a challenging summer all around. So let us get it right in the remaining couple of weeks and days so that your voice is heard. To that end, I want to hear some more voices in the conversation. So Maria, are there public participants who would like to comment?
Kim, I don't see any hands up. So just a reminder, if you do have a comment, you can use the raise hand icon on your toolbar. And if you're dialing in, the command is *9, and that will raise your hand in our webinar platform and put you in the queue. Looks like we have a raised hand from Rachel Simmons. Rachel, your line is open.
Hi, thank you for letting me chime in here and for all of your work, your voluntary work on the committee. I was really excited when the governor offered this. I'm coming from a perspective as a medical provider and also a current full-time, aside from some respite, caregiver for a parent. So this is really important for me and for my family. Couple of things I wanted to mention, and I'm sorry that I did miss a small portion of the presentation. Okay. So I may have, yeah. I may say something that someone said, but one of the good places that could be a source of information about disability and aging, though obviously those are not always the same, is the Center for Independent Living, or the Centers for Independent Living that are located, I think, in different parts of the state. Mm-hmm. And I know that they don't, they're not like CHIS, they don't provide a statewide survey of information that you can gather, but that might be a useful resource. I also wanted to say a number of people, I know that Nari Ree from the Labor Center mentioned this, and I think Christopher Langston as well. The truth is, yes, that family caregivers like myself are providing the majority of care. If your family member is not living, hasn't been moved to assisted living or a facility, a nursing facility. And I think one of the demographic pieces of data that could be gathered that might be helpful, though not necessarily predictive of, care being provided, is just census data or data from either the ACS or CHIS on like family structures and who, what families are having older adults living with them. And I think that would also, give us some indication of social isolation, which is another thing that I didn't hear mentioned a lot of. And I know that there's probably not that much data on it, but given that we're in the era of COVID, I think it's really important, especially for older adults, to look at their social connections, because that also gets into what we're all talking about. Like, are they able to stay in their communities, in their homes? And so if there's any opening for adding, new questions to any of those tools, I think that would be helpful. Something having to do with social isolation.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Let me give it a minute. I do want to acknowledge that there were committee members who had their hands up that we'll go back to if we don't, but I want to give the public a moment. Here's Evie, apologies.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to mention, I think it's been brought up in other places for the master plan, but under the behavioral health, there is the Village Movement California, who are promoting and supporting at this point by giving us lots of technical help on how to move ahead and the like, which is really neighborhood groups of seniors who are there to support each other as much as we can. Some of the groups are fairly large and have been around a while and are doing a lot more things than others, but I think the whole movement is something to look at in terms of behavioral health.
Thank you. Other public comments? Maria, I don't know if you can do this pivot, but let's allow public comment if people want to raise their hand. You can kind of keep a track on that, but let's pivot back. And I believe that both Stacy Moore and Cheryl Brown had their hands up, and so we could hear from them as the last two committee members.
Which one first?
Cheryl, please, you first.
Stacy, if you can. Someone said that they didn't know if cities, in every city and every county had an emergency plan. And AB 2311 is called the Emergency Services Access and Functional Needs in Emergencies. That was a bill that I authored when I was in the Assembly. And that bill says that everyone has to have the plan, and all the plans, because of this bill, have to be updated. And as they're updated, certain things have to be looked at. So if you ever want to it's online. You can just look at AB 2311, and there's information that would help in that question that someone had. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Brown,
and
you're awesome.
Cheryl, that's happening in real time, as I know you know, and frankly, to Rachel's comment, in partnership with the California Federation for Independent Living Centers to make sure that signage is accessible and transportation is accessible and dietary needs. These are real-time conversations, so right on point.
You know, the reason that we did it was because of the fires and because of the shooting in San Bernardino, where people who were deaf didn't know what was going on. They knew there was something going on, but they didn't know. And then up in the Bay Area, or up in Napa area where they had a big fire, somebody would come and help the seniors, take them out of their wheelchair, put them in a van or in a truck, and leave the wheelchair behind. So there was no plan. This legislation says you have to have a plan for seniors and for functional needs.
Stacy Moore.
So my comment really was kind of dovetails along with comments that Donna Benton and Nari were making around downward mobility. And I was just going to elevate the importance of looking at, equity issues within this frame because of, a host of factors. Nari mentioned the Latino community and, the impact of the Great Recession on household wealth in the Latino community is still being felt today. There's been no true recovery there, right? And so I think looking at specific population subsets is so important. If you look at, Black women who are more likely to be in lower income jobs, more likely to be single, there are myriad of factors that we should really make it essential for us to be looking at this type of data through an equity lens. And I just wanted to state that.
Thank you very much. Terry and Carrie, do you have any final closing comments before I make one observation and send us back into the world?
My closing comments are just gratitude and thanks, and that it has been such an honor and a pleasure to work with all of you, and hope we can continue working together to measure, track, evaluate the implementation of the master plan moving forward.
And I was going to say, in many ways, just listening to the hours of discussion, we often say at the Master Plan Stakeholder Advisory Committee, we're trying to boil the ocean, which is hard enough, but I think you all are actually mapping the ocean, which I think, as many of you know, the ocean, although it's all around us, just as aging is not mapped. And we are still learning about the depths and the contours and the canyons. So it is really an extraordinary task that's underway here. But I will also say it's one that gives me the most hope, because I do think a lot of what we're doing here on the level setting and organizing the information and organizing in usable ways will power us through pandemics and recessions and bad times and good times. I am the most optimistic about this part of the work moving forward and really setting that foundation. So I am just so amazingly grateful and humbled by the brain power and analytical power and commitment and compassion on display today and throughout the past. Who knows when the first meeting was? Was it October, Carrie? 10 months? 10 months? of work. And again,
Yeah, I
the
think
work.
it was October.
And again, this is really just a pivot point, not the end. We will receive all this, be working with our agency and cabinet colleagues, and then continuing our partnership with all of you, and then moving to implementation. So more to come, but an incredible point we're at right now. So thank you. Stay safe, stay connected, as we say. Be well.